Good evening, everyone. Hello, Jamie. We had
Hey,
to meet
Jamil.
early. We had to
Yeah,
meet early. DeepSeek actually has forced us to come online and talk about it. A lot of people are actually asking about it.
yeah. I feel like we should have the deet, 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 deet going in the background. This is like hot off the press, and it is a couple of days after I would say everything kind of hit the fan, um, literally including like hitting the markets. But this is good because it's given at least 48 hours, 72 hours to really understand a little bit more around what is DeepSeek, what it's not, and maybe think a little bit more about the implications of it. So. Um,
Yeah.
Uh, like we
And,
said,
and Jamie, a lot of people are asking actually about the technical aspect, how to use it, particularly like consumer knows how to use it, I think, but from enterprise, and that is what you will dig deeper into. But let me just set the baseline and let everybody users come to the same page about why we are even talking about this today, right? And we're going to keep it very short, 10 minutes. But that should give you a power punch, like capsule of what the DeepSeek is and how to use it and what you should be aware of and what are the recommendations. So, bottom line, DeepSeek is a Chinese company. On January 27, they actually released some models called DeepSeek R1, as well as they have another model called DeepSeek V3, which is a multimodal model. The DeepSeek R1 specifically is a reasoning model, okay, and that actually blew the world. And we will talk about it. Why it has gone viral? Why is everybody talking about it? The reason is that the quality is as good as OpenAI's Oven model, which is their reasoning model, which was an unmatched model. In fact, Anthropic doesn't even have a reasoning model so far, right? So it was a eye-opening view because a Chinese company out of nowhere has actually come up with a reasoning model which is as good as Oven model, if not exceeding that. The other thing is that the cost is 27 times cheaper when you compare the Oven model's output token cost as well as the DeepSeek R1 output token cost, specifically on the output. It is
wait,
also open source and
I was gonna,
MIT licensed to commercialize freely.
yeah, I was going to say, caveat a lot of things here. It's based upon what we know today. There's things that are still unknown. So like even that cost piece, I've heard some rumblings that that's an introductory price. So stay tuned. I mean, because things are rapidly changing on that.
That is true. There is a lot of still unknown. I completely agree. But that is still actually created a lot of buzz. And the other reason is that not just like the quality good, the cost is cheap, although with the caveat, and this is still open source and MIT license to commercialize freely. And finally, all this was achieved despite the GPU's restriction on the Chinese company. So that's why actually the world went crazy about it. That blew it, and it reflects in the way that it became the number one top free app on the Apple Store as well as Play Store in US, and it has beaten ChatGPT to that. Number two, it actually created so much confusion about that. Okay, is the compute really required? What is the future of Nvidia? It went to that crazy. It wiped out $593 billion in market cap of Nvidia, which was a record one day loss for any company. Okay. And overall, it actually wiped out $1 trillion of market cap because the market went crazy about it and everybody was uncertain about the AI companies. And finally, they created a lot of question about the massive AI compute spend which is required. And right before that, the Stargate came, which talked about the $500 billion, and and it also talked about the effectiveness. It basically questioned the effectiveness of restriction that was placed on the China. Overall, it is something that really went viral, and we must talk about it. Jimmy, give us the technical details about it.
Yeah. So this is where it gets interesting. So um, if you take two steps back, like, why is this so different? And you have to think about what is traditional AI training versus what the R1 approach was. So most models are trained in usually two major phases. One is a supervised learning. Won't get into all depths of that, but this is where models are fed large amounts of data that are pre-labeled based upon the textual information, so it can learn patterns of language. This is why you need a lot of horsepower, the GPUs, to run those models based upon that large data set. And then there's usually a secondary step, which is called RLHF, which stands for reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning, human feedback. This is where the model is fine-tuned based upon the human feedback to make that response more helpful. Well, DeepSeek actually flipped that process. So instead of starting out with supervised training or supervised learning, they trained the models from scratch using reinforcement learning. The reason why this is such a big deal is that this is usually, as I just mentioned, done later on in the process, not at the beginning. And what that really then, the implications around that is, well, if you're doing that, there's not that much data as compared to the supervised learning side. So that means you need less compute, which is why, again, hysteria around, oh my God, why is there so much infrastructure that is being put forth and towards all these different companies. So what DeepSeek did for R1 is starting out with um, that reinforced learning piece. And let me bring up a slide, and it'll kind of run through a little bit more in depth on really what's going on here. So there's a couple of key things that DeepSeek is actually doing. They're starting off with their V3 model. Now, we haven't gone into what V3 is, but that's been out for a little while. So it's not like DeepSeek just like came up out of nowhere. They've been doing their implementations in their lab. So you want to think of like DeepSeek V3 as aligned with something like GPT-4o or the Llama models, or the Meta models from, or the Meta Llama models. So it's starting out from that simple starting point. But what they do next is actually do something called cold start fine tuning. So this is where they take a small data set of chain of thought examples, which is used to improve the readability and structure. So this is something that is done in a very small step to help with that setting up the stage of that model. I'll throw in a couple of other things in here. There's still some conjecture of like these starting off models. Is it really DeepSeek V3? Are they starting off with something like the Llama model, or using GPT-4o or even O1 to help with some of the data that's being trained? Who knows? We don't know, but we do know what they published in the paper and the way that they're training this model. So they start out with this cold start fine tuning, then goes into this reinforcement learning. Like I said, this is typically done later in the stage. So this, in the sense, the model is being trained to pick up reward signals to, again, enhance the reasoning, the consistency, and the accuracy of these models. Next comes the what actually happens next is there's rejection sampling. So what this or what the training step is doing is looking at, well, what outcomes are actually aligned best, and it's using the model to determine the best answers. So it's using itself to determine, all right, well, what are the better models, and it's using that to refine itself later on in this process. So that's where the rejection sampling comes in, and that's being used to further refine the model. At least from the paper, there's around 600,000 reasoning focused and 200,000 general task samples that were created for this step. And then it goes into a final refinement learning stage. So it's actually going through another reinforced learning step, which aligns the model a little bit better. And then ultimately, that ends up with the DeepSeek R1 model. We're not really going to talk too much about it here today, but another thing that the DeepSeek R1 step did is it actually distilled smaller models. So basically these smaller models, like whether it's Gwen or, and there's about 4 or 5 of them that they distilled out, they're improving those models because they're taking the outputs from the R1 model into that step. So that's how they're actually doing it. I'll impart a few other quick comments because you did mention about the hardware. There's certainly been enough news out there that this was trained on $6 million worth of hardware. There are NVIDIA chips being used. It is the older chips, and it's the chips that are allowed to be imported into China. The question is whether or not that's it. So, is there more hardware that was being used at this? So we don't know that. The other thing I can say, and again, this is based upon what they put in their paper, They did do a couple of interesting optimization techniques to get to that level of model. So they used mixture of experts. They used memory compression. Probably one of the more important one, they used the lower precision of computing using only floating point 8 calculations versus what is normal or what people use today, which needs more space, more compute power. And they also did some customized GPU programming to take advantage of those NVIDIA chips, which are the H800 chips. So anyway, that's a little bit probably too far deep, but that's how they were, at least on paper, able to get down to that level of capability.
I think this is where really the miracle is, right? That's a secret sauce. So I think thanks for explaining that, Jamie. Let's talk about the dollar effect, right? So, for example, how do you access the DeepSeek R1? It is available actually for free to consumers through the DeepSeek chat platform. You can actually download the app as well, although they kind of restricted the new registration because there was just a burst of the users. On the other hand, OpenAI's Oven model is actually available through a subscription plan priced at $20 per month, right? The Plus model. But just yesterday, Microsoft has also actually made DeepThink feature available for all the Copilot users. And DeepThink actually uses the Oven model. So it's also kind of available in a free mode as well, although there are some limits in terms of how much you can use it. But it's available to anyone and free through the Microsoft Copilot as well. On the other hand, enterprise access, DeepSeek R1 output is actually 2.19 dollars per million token. Okay, and that's the output. Now, OpenAI correspondingly actually charges $60 for a million tokens. So there is a huge difference, and there is actually almost like a 27 times difference, right? So that's on the output. The input prices actually vary much more. So input without cash is actually 100 times cheaper because input for Oven output is $15 per million token, and it is only 14 cents. Cashed input is slightly different. Cashed price is actually much lesser. Like in terms of the multiplication, for example, cash input is at 55 cents per million token, and it is actually $7.5 per million token. So not as much of a difference. The bottom line is, however, all these prices, just remember that these are all kind of introductory prices. They might change, but that's what actually reflects currently on the DeepSeek price. One more thing. You can also actually, for the enterprise user, the OpenAI offers the ChatGPT Pro plan, which is $200 per month, and you get more compute and more access and more limits, etc. as well. So that's how, in terms of how do you get access to it and what do you pay. How do
Yeah,
we use it in Azure, Jamie?
yeah. Let me just maybe make that a reality then for the things you just mentioned. So while you could go out to DeepSeek itself and use the chat application or use the APIs, it's also a open source, so you could theoretically download the model from Hugging Face and then install it somewhere. Well, Microsoft has actually provided two different ways of using the model. And if you go this route, you're not using anything that is aligned with China. And I want to stress this again. You're actually using your own model in a Microsoft ecosystem, which means it's your data and it's controlled by you, which is super important. So there's two different methods. One is you could run a virtual machine or a cluster inside of Azure through Azure Machine Learning. And in that machine learning environment, you can stand up the DeepSeek R1 model. I'll jump to that page in a second. The other thing that was just announced yesterday is the ability for you to run DeepSeek R1 as models as a service inside of the Microsoft Azure Foundry environment, which basically means you can pick it up on the model catalog. So this was the announcement. I'm going to jump straight to the model. So here is DeepSeek running on one of my Azure Foundry projects. So you literally deploy it. It's a model. The great thing about this, you can also wrap this model underneath the content safety. So not only is this running in Azure, but you can put content safety around it as well. And again, your data is your data in this one. So very simple example. I asked it to do terraforming. What I really like about this model is it actually shows you how it's thinking about reasoning, kind of similar to the Google Gemini model, by the way. But it actually, if you look at this and you could try out this prompt, but it stops and thinks like, look at here. It says, wait, oh, what about the ethical considerations of introducing organisms into Mars for the terraforming? So it actually stops and then thinks about what it needs to do next. And then it actually gives you the output. I ran the same thing under the O1 model with ChatGPT, and it's a black box. I mean, it just goes and says, all right, well, here's your output. While this is still good, and by the way, both responses are good, I happen to like the way that DeepSeek actually provides it to you. And as I mentioned, there is a way of putting DeepSeek on a machine learning cluster. These are the different steps. So we'll provide these in the show notes to do it. So anyway, just wanted to show that real quick.
Yeah, seems like it has won you over, Jamie.
Yeah.
It is definitely admirable, but there are some concerns as well. And let me just go through a quick list of concerns. Some of our corporates, enterprise customers have also been curious about those concerns. So, number one, training and inference costs, which has created so much furor about, like, okay, just about $6 million, you did it, and OpenAI is asking for billions of dollars. Well, these are unverifiable number. Anybody can report anything. So, while this is, we have to take it as a face value, but it is still unverifiable. And people have questioned it, right? Is it truly the only cost, or is it just the part of the cost? Number two, there's security concern, right? Cyber security concern. Wiz actually reported an exposed database, which was actually giving out the data and the keys, and they reported it to DeepSeek, and they took the corrective action, and then they took care of it. And there was also an earlier on Tuesday, I think there was some sort of an outage on the DeepSeek as well. It also doesn't provide the details of the data which was used for training. So some of the people have also questioned that truly open source nature of it, and that in fact the data that was used for training, that actually creates some legal troubles potentially, because the OpenAI and Microsoft have actually questioned if, and they're probing if the DeepSeek has improperly used the OpenAI APIs to actually train, which you cannot as per the contract. The NVIDIA Singapore data centers have also shown some sort of, the consumption. So I think this is still under, this is an evolving story, remember, but there are already some areas of concern that are emerging. And that could become a problem, right, if the legal, troubles start. There are also worries about the censorship and access to users' data by the Chinese government, and that could also lead to the same fate or the trouble that also the TikTok has gone through. So remember that angle is also possible. Price also, as Jamie said earlier, it's in some of the cases introductory, although there is no indication that it will suddenly shoot up. But it is still, it is a new company in the way that it's a new offering that people still haven't really used it provenly. So it will take some time to understand whether the price is just honey trap, or is it really real. Finally, the other thing is that the open source, right? I think more than OpenAI, I think the entity that is a little bit more worried about is a Meta, because it kind of questioned their leadership in the open source, because they really have done a tremendous job in optimizing and releasing it as an open source, and they kind of are threatening that position of Meta as a open source leader. It also threatened the companies like Mistral and Cohere, who have partly actually done the open source models, because DeepSeek obviously has taken the lead over them now. So with that, I'll stop all the concerns. But what are the other recommendations, Jamie, that you will make?
Yeah, just two parting thoughts as we close this out, as far as like recommendations, and probably the biggest thing I would say is don't fear something, dive into it. So part of that is think about evaluating these tools, but evaluate it in a way that you're considering your deployment options. I talked about running this on Azure. So the main thing here is maintain control over your data, and alleviate some of those privacy concerns, things that you may have around security and the like. So, obviously, a nod here to running these models on Azure, using your own infrastructure, doing the models as a service, as I just showed. The other thing too, and this kind of goes to what I said, don't shy away from things like this. You want to foster a culture in your company, in your organization, wherever you are, around innovation and experiment. So encourage your teams to explore and use these emerging technologies like DeepSeek R1 and whatever else is going to be coming down the line, either later on this week or next month or next year. So, embrace the innovation, embrace what you could do within your organization to stay ahead of the curve, and just evolve with the way that these technologies are moving at such a rapid pace.
This is good for innovation. This is good for competition. And you can still try these things safely, as Jamie said, within the Azure confinement now. So nothing like it, Jamie. I think I hope everybody liked this episode. Let us know if you want to know more about it, and we will talk about it in a future episodes as well.
Sounds good. All right. Signing
Everyone,
off. Thanks, everybody.
bye, Jamie.